Elijah Carter had finally done it. Years of coding into the wee hours, navigating the cutthroat world of tech startups, and sacrificing weekends were finally paying off. He stood on the wraparound porch of his new home, a classic craftsman boasting. 3 bedrooms and a breathtaking view of the rolling hills that painted the horizon. It was more than just a house. It was a sanctuary, a testament to his hard work and a symbol of the future he was building for himself. The closing documents were barely dry when Elijah's mind was already racing with plans for upgrades. It wasn't just interested in aesthetics. It was focused on security, on creating a haven that was both beautiful and impenetrable. As a tech professional, he understood the vulnerabilities of traditional security systems and saw an opportunity to leverage his expertise to create something truly state-of-the-art. The first phase of his project involved a complete overhaul of the lighting system. Smart bulbs with adjustable brightness and color temperature were installed throughout the house, allowing him to control the ambiance with a simple voice command or a tap on his phone. Next came the cameras, strategically placed around the perimeter of the property to provide comprehensive surveillance. High-resolution lenses, motion sensors, and night vision capabilities ensured that every corner of his land was under constant watch. But the centerpiece of his security upgrade was the smart lock system. Forget fumbling with keys. Elijah installed biometric scanners and keypad entry systems on every door, each connected to a central hub that he could monitor remotely. The system even included facial recognition technology, allowing him to grant access to trusted friends and family with ease. For Elijah, it wasn't just about preventing break-ins. It was about peace of mind. He wanted to feel safe and secure in his home, knowing that he had taken every precaution to protect himself and his property. He reveled in the seamless integration of technology and craftsmanship. This was the house he had dreamed of, the house he had earned. Little did he know that his pursuit of security would soon thrust him into a conflict he never anticipated, a clash of ideologies and prejudices that would test his patience and his resolve. Because while Elijah saw innovation and progress, someone else saw something far more sinister. Karen, who lived 2 houses down, had made it abundantly clear that she did not approve of his presence in the neighborhood. From the moment he moved in, she watched him with a hawk-like intensity, her gaze piercing and unwelcoming. She never offered a friendly wave or a neighborly greeting, instead opting to stand in her yard with her arms crossed, radiating disapproval. With every fiber of her being, Elijah initially dismissed her behavior as harmless eccentricity. He figured she was just a busybody who was suspicious of newcomers. He tried to ignore her and focus on settling into his new home. But Karen's scrutiny only intensified as he began his security upgrades. She seemed to take personal offense at the sight of him installing cameras and smart locks, as if he were somehow violating her sense of privacy and tranquility. The feeling of being watched began to creep into Elijah's mind. He felt like he was constantly under surveillance, his every move scrutinized and judged. He knew he couldn't let Karen's behavior intimidate him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she was waiting for him to make a mistake, waiting for an opportunity to pounce. Elijah was on his porch, putting the finishing touches on the smart deadbolt, the last piece of his digital fortress. The system was elegantly designed, the sleek metal seamlessly blending with the craftsman aesthetic of his front door. As he synced the lock to his phone, a wave of satisfaction washed over him. He had created a secure and convenient entry point to his home, a technological marvel that would protect him and his loved ones. He tested the facial recognition feature, the camera instantly recognizing his face and unlocking the door with a satisfying click. He smiled, pleased with the seamless functionality of the system. Just as he was admiring his handiwork, a shadow fell across the porch. He looked up and saw Karen standing at the foot of his steps, her face contorted in a mask of disapproval. He sighed inwardly, bracing himself for what he knew was coming. Karen didn't bother with pleasantries. She launched straight into a tirade, her voice dripping with condescension and indignation. She demanded to know why he was installing surveillance tech on a family-friendly street. She claimed that his cameras were making her feel watched, and that he was violating her comfort. She even accused him of violating zoning laws, despite the fact that smart locks were perfectly legal and commonplace. Elijah remained calm, trying to reason with her. He explained that the smart lock was for his own security and that the cameras were pointed at his property, not hers. He assured her that he had no intention of spying on her or invading her privacy. "This is my property, and I have the right to protect it," he said, his voice firm but respectful. But Karen wasn't interested in reason or logic. She was convinced that Elijah was a threat to her and her community. She doubled down on her accusations, claiming that she didn't feel safe with someone like him living in the neighborhood. Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Elijah felt a chill run down his spine. He knew exactly what she meant. It wasn't about the smart lock or the cameras. It was about his race. He was a black man in a predominantly white neighborhood, and Karen saw him as an outsider, a threat to the status quo. He tried to maintain his composure, but a surge of anger welled up inside him. He had worked hard to achieve his dreams, and he wasn't going to let a racist neighbor intimidate him or drive him out of his home. He calmly but firmly told Karen that he was done with the conversation and that he would appreciate it if she left his property. Karen refused to back down. She continued to rant and rave, accusing him of all sorts of ridiculous things. Finally, Elijah had enough. He turned and walked back into his house, slamming the door behind him. He stood in the hallway, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't believe that this was happening. He had just moved into his dream home, and now he was being harassed by a racist neighbor who was trying to make his life a living hell. He tried to shake it off, telling himself that it was just one isolated incident. But deep down, he knew that this was just the beginning. He had a feeling that Karen wasn't going to let it go that easily, and he was right. The next day, 2 police officers showed up at his door. The police officers, a man and a woman, stood on Elijah's porch, their faces unreadable. The woman spoke first, her tone official but polite. "Mr. Carter, we received a call about suspicious wiring and possible hacking equipment on your property. Is there anything you can tell us about that?" Elijah stared at them in disbelief. He knew exactly who had called the police. Karen, standing across the street, watched with her arms crossed and a smug smile on her face. The audacity of her accusation was staggering. He couldn't believe she would stoop so low as to involve the police in her petty vendetta. He took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm and collected. Knew that if he lost his temper, he would only be playing into Karen's hands. "Officers, I can assure you that there is nothing suspicious about my property," he said, his voice steady. "I recently installed a smart lock system on my doors, which involves some wiring, but it's all perfectly legitimate and up to code." The male officer raised an eyebrow, skepticism evident in his eyes. "A smart lock system, huh? What exactly does that entail?" Elijah patiently explained the features of the smart lock, detailing the biometric scanners, keypad entry, and facial recognition technology. He showed them the manufacturer's specifications and the app on his phone, demonstrating how the system worked. He even mentioned his background in tech, explaining that he had helped design the firmware for a similar lock at his previous job. As he spoke, the officer's expressions began to soften. They could tell that he was being honest and that there was nothing nefarious about his actions. The female officer seemed particularly impressed by his knowledge and expertise. "So, you're saying this is all just a misunderstanding?" she asked, her tone more conciliatory. "That's exactly what it is," Elijah replied. "My neighbor has a problem with me and my security upgrades, and she's trying to use the police to harass me." He gestured towards Karen, who was still watching from across the street, her smile unwavering. The officers turned to look at Karen, their faces hardening. They had dealt with her type before, the busybody neighbor who called the police over trivial matters, wasting their time and resources. The female officer walked over to Karen and spoke to her in a low voice. Elijah couldn't hear what she was saying, but he could tell that she was scolding her. Karen's smile quickly faded, and she began to argue with the officer, her voice rising in anger. After a few minutes, the officer returned to Elijah, shaking her head in exasperation. "Mr. Carter, we apologize for the inconvenience," she said. "We've spoken to your neighbor, and we've made it clear that she can't call the police over frivolous matters. If she continues to harass you, please don't hesitate to contact us again." Elijah thanked the officers for their professionalism and understanding. As they drove away, he couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. He had managed to defuse the situation without escalating it. But he also knew that this was far from over. Karen was not going to give up that easily. He could see the fury burning in her eyes as she glared at him from across the street. He knew that she was plotting her next move, and he knew that he had to be prepared. He went inside his house and locked the door, a sense of unease settling over him. He felt like he was living in a pressure cooker, waiting for the inevitable explosion. He decided to take matters into his own hands. He reviewed his security footage from the previous night, hoping to find some evidence of Karen's harassment. What he found was far more shocking than he could have ever imagined. Elijah meticulously combed through the security footage from the night before, his eyes scanning the screen for any sign of Karen. He replayed the footage from 2:13 a.m., his heart pounding in his chest as he watched Karen emerge from the shadows. She crept onto his property, a flashlight clutched in her hand, her face contorted in a malicious sneer. She approached his front door, her eyes fixed on the smart lock. He watched in horror as she began to tamper with the device, her fingers probing the wiring and attempting to disable the system. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was actively trying to sabotage his security system. He zoomed in on the footage, capturing every detail of her actions. The camera recorded her fingerprints on the device and captured a clear image of her face. But what shocked him the most was the audio recording. As she tampered with the lock, Karen could be heard muttering to herself, her words filled with venom and hatred. "I'll catch you in the act," she hissed. "I'll show you that you don't belong here." Elijah felt a surge of anger course through his veins. He couldn't believe the level of malice and prejudice that Karen harbored. He had been right all along. She saw him as an outsider, a threat to her way of life. He spent the next few hours compiling the evidence, carefully extracting the relevant clips from the security footage, and creating a detailed report. He knew that he had to take action. Couldn't let Karen get away with her harassment and vandalism. Decided to contact his lawyer, Sarah, sharp and resourceful attorney who had experience dealing with similar cases of neighbor disputes and discrimination. He had met Sarah at a tech conference a year prior and had kept in touch, knowing that her expertise might come in handy someday. He called Sarah and explained the situation, sending her the security footage and the report he had compiled. Sarah was appalled by Karen's behavior. She assured Elijah that she would do everything in her power to help him fight back. "This is completely unacceptable, Elijah," she said. "Karen's actions constitute harassment, vandalism, and potentially even hate crimes. We're going to make sure she pays for what she's done." Sarah immediately began preparing a cease and desist letter, demanding that Karen stop harassing Elijah and refrain from trespassing on his property. Report, providing the authorities with the security footage as evidence. Elijah followed Sarah's instructions, feeling a sense of empowerment as he took steps to protect himself and his property. He knew that he was fighting an uphill battle, but he was determined to stand his ground. He wasn't going to let Karen drive him out of his dream home. But the situation was about to get even more complicated. Just 2 days later, Karen tried to pull the same stunt on another neighbor. 2 days later, Elijah received a call from Maria, a single mother who lived a few houses down. Maria had recently installed a smart lock on her front door, inspired by Elijah's security upgrades. Maria was distraught. She explained that Karen had confronted her that morning, accusing her of turning their peaceful neighborhood into a high-tech surveillance zone. Karen had demanded that Maria remove the smart lock, claiming that it was making her feel uncomfortable and unsafe. Maria had refused, asserting her right to protect her property. Karen had then stormed off, threatening to report her to the HOA. Maria had called Elijah because she knew he had dealt with Karen's antics before. She was worried that Karen would escalate the situation and potentially try to damage her smart lock, just like she had tried to do to Elijah's. Elijah was furious. Couldn't believe that Karen was targeting another neighbor. He realized that her harassment wasn't just directed at him. It was a pattern of behavior, a deliberate attempt to control and intimidate the people around her. He immediately drove over to Maria's house to offer his support. As he arrived, he saw Karen standing in Maria's front yard, arguing with her in a loud and aggressive manner. He pulled out his phone and started recording the interaction. He watched as Karen approached Maria's front door and began to tamper with the smart lock, just as she had done to his. Maria screamed at her to stop, but Karen ignored her, continuing to fiddle with the device. Suddenly, Maria's smart lock security system activated, sending a notification to Elijah's phone. He saw the live footage of Karen tampering with the lock, her face clearly visible in the frame. He immediately called the police, providing them with the video evidence. Within minutes, 2 police cars arrived at the scene. The officers approached Karen and placed her under arrest. She began to scream and resist, claiming that she was being harassed and that she was the victim. "I'm just trying to protect my community," she yelled. "These people are turning our neighborhood into a police state." The officers ignored her pleas and shoved her into the back of a patrol car. As they drove her away, Karen continued to scream, her voice echoing through the neighborhood. Elijah and Maria watched in stunned silence. They couldn't believe that Karen had finally been held accountable for her actions. But they also knew that this was just the beginning. They had a feeling that Karen's arrest would only fuel her anger and resentment. They had to be prepared for her to retaliate. Later that week, Elijah received a call from another neighbor, Brenda, who had lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years. Brenda had heard about Karen's arrest and wanted to share some information with Elijah. She revealed that Karen had a long history of harassing and intimidating her neighbors. She had filed multiple false complaints with the HOA, targeting residents, who she deemed to be undesirable. She had even tried to get someone evicted for flying a pride flag. Brenda explained that Karen was obsessed with maintaining control over the neighborhood and that she would stop at nothing to get her way. Elijah was shocked by Brenda's revelations. He realized that Karen's prejudice and hatred ran far deeper than he had imagined. He was determined to bring her to justice and put an end to her reign of terror. The weeks following Karen's arrest were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and community discussions. Elijah and Maria worked closely with their lawyers and the local authorities to ensure that Karen was held accountable for her crimes. The security footage and the testimonies from other neighbors proved to be damning evidence. Karen was charged with vandalism, harassment, and attempted burglary. The HOA also launched its own investigation into Karen's past actions, uncovering a mountain of evidence of her discriminatory behavior. They voted to ban her from attending HOA meetings and stripped her of her committee positions. The community rallied around Elijah and Maria, offering their support and expressing their outrage at Karen's behavior. Many neighbors came forward to share their own stories of harassment and intimidation, revealing the extent of Karen's reign of terror. The local news covered the story extensively, highlighting the importance of standing up to racism and discrimination. The community also organized a neighborhood watch program, encouraging residents to report any suspicious activity and to look out for one another. Elijah and Maria became leaders in the community, working to promote inclusivity and understanding. They organized workshops on diversity and anti-racism, inviting experts to speak and facilitate discussions. They also partnered with local organizations to provide resources and support to marginalized communities. The legal proceedings against Karen dragged on for several months. She initially pleaded not guilty, claiming that she was being targeted and that she was the victim. But as the evidence mounted against her, she eventually changed her plea to guilty. She was sentenced to community service and ordered to pay restitution to Elijah and Maria for the damages she had caused. She was also issued a restraining order, preventing her from contacting Elijah, Maria, or any of the other neighbors she had harassed. Shortly after the sentencing, Karen's house was put up for sale. It was clear that she could no longer live in the neighborhood, not after what she had done. As Elijah watched the for sale sign being hammered into her front lawn, he felt a sense of closure. He had stood up to racism and discrimination, and he had won. It protected his dream home and his community. But he also knew that the fight for equality and justice was far from over. He was determined to continue using his voice and his platform to advocate for change. In the months that followed, a young, diverse family purchased Karen's house. They were welcomed into the neighborhood with open arms, embraced by the community that had once been divided by prejudice and fear. Elijah and Maria became close friends. With the new family, sharing meals and celebrating holidays together, the neighborhood thrived, becoming a vibrant and inclusive community where everyone felt safe and welcome. Elijah finally found peace in his dream home, surrounded by neighbors who supported and respected him. he continued to upgrade his security system, but now it was for the purpose of protecting his loved ones, not defending himself against hate. He had learned a valuable lesson from his experience with Karen, that standing up to injustice is not always easy, but it is always worth it, and that even in the face of prejudice and hatred, community and solidarity can triumph.